the film, as much as it is about tech and AI, and it's very of a current moment. It really is just about power to me.
Mm. I am very excited today to be speaking with Kenya-Jade Pinto, the director of the SANDBOX, premiering at Hot Docs. Kenya-Jade, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Honestly, this is such a fascinating and amazing, like heart-wrenching film in every possible way. The Sandbox, talking about our relationship to surveillance and migrant families, and how does a story like this come together? Why did you want to tell it?
Yeah, we've been making it for a long time. My well, first of all, and thank you for your interest and for your kind words. My background is as a lawyer. So before I moved into filmmaking, I trained as a lawyer who focused on refugee and international law at the University of Ottawa. And I was also working as a documentary photographer during that time, so very early on was blending those skill sets together. And I learned throughout my journey that in Canada, we started outsourcing specific applications in the immigration law context to algorithms. So when my family came to Canada when I was a child, we came under what's called a humanitarian and compassionate grounds application. So very discretionary applications, the kinds of applications that you would want someone, a person, to read. And those were the types of applications that were being piloted in a program that was going to be outsourced to algorithms. So I started wondering when I learned this, what might have happened to us. And at first, I was just looking in the Canadian context. I was following a human rights lawyer who had done that work and was just starting to look more globally, specifically in Greece, Petra Molnar. She was looking at, these prison style refugee camps. And so I followed that thread. And through her, I met Lydia Manuelidou, who we meet in the film, and started looking at, started pulling the thread, and seeing that it was much broader and bigger in scope, and impacting some of the most vulnerable people globally. So that's where it began, and it just yeah, kind of organically organically grew from there.
Yeah, this is one of those films that rightfully sends sort of chills down your spine as you see the interaction between technology and the abuse of technology, I should say, with human rights. And of course, you've traveled. This documentary takes us from Arizona to Greece and East Africa. And I was wondering, in these experiences, as you're there, what things shocked you the most? What commonalities did you see?
Yeah, I think, it's hard to quantify that feeling. I think what we do in the film and what it felt like making the film was a kind of gradual accumulation of assaults, if that makes sense. In what it felt like. So that by the time I spent a month on the ship, and by the time we were in that moment, it all felt a lot. Um, yeah, I'm not sure that I could answer what shocked me the most, but I think, looking at the scope of it and the degree to which everyone is required to participate, the feeling of not knowing, you know, the the feeling of being able to open a door to a black box, but only for a second before you must shut it again. All of those things in and of themselves felt big and shocking at the moment, and then it's like the cumulative effect of that I think left me quite changed on a personal level, and that I hope that audiences have a similar experience when they're watching the film.
It's interesting in this film because, I mean, obviously we see technology as something that a dehumanization of people to digital outputs, and and scores and this and all sorts of things as we see. But I know by film's end, the argument is that the progress in technology are very important, but the problem is not technology, we're told. Um, I know and then it says darkness and light exist in humans. So can you talk about that? What the real problem is here?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the film, as much as it is about tech and AI and it's very of a current moment, it really is just about power to me.
Mm.
And that's what that's saying. It's about how these tools map onto modalities of power, how we structure power in our daily lives, how we defer to power, and defer tools to power. Um, and in the film, I think we show kind of these two versions of the sandbox, which is that there's one where the tools are actively used, and there's one where they're not used at all. And so in the story that we hear played out, that's an example of where the argument is, well, if we have this, we can save and protect people, but we have it anyway and we don't use it like that. So it's really about how tools like technology map onto bigger ideas of power and reinforcing a status quo, and then we don't answer all the questions in the film, but the next set of questions is, well, okay, like who gets to decide that, and are we okay with it, and why, and what can we do to stop it?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is a thing. Again, it's a tool. This is a tool to be used, and I love the illustration there of the gentleman trying to justify his actions by suggesting a surgeon could murder you with a scalpel, but they don't. It's like, well, okay, um, but Why are we so willing to dehumanize or like you said, justify the status quo, just dehumanize people more using technology as a way to advance that?
I don't know. I wish I had the answer to that question. The why. I mean, this isn't a new story, right? In a way, it's a really old story. We've heard it before. It just looks a little different. And my hope is that with this film, that the way that we're receiving the message is a little different, so that it resonates a little differently, so that we can answer that question together, or at least start to. Because yeah, the why is I think it's always going to dumbfound me too. Why are we so comfortable um putting something between us and another human being to allow us not to see them as an equal? We've been doing that for a long time as humans. This is just a new way. Yeah.
Yeah, we continue to find new ways to do it, and every time we ask how we let it happen, um,
Exactly. That's it.
it really is. It's staggering to see. And you see these incredible every scenario feels different but oddly the same. And maybe oddly isn't the word. Terrifyingly the same, maybe, I guess, is a better way to do it. Oh, I would love to ask you. I mean, the title comes from this as well, but there is a line that says, "It's only when when the experiments outgrow the sandbox that you see what they really are." I was wondering what that means to you and why that needed to be the title of the film.
Yeah. Well, the sandbox has always been the working title of the film for me. In part because, this idea that the tech begins in a place where we're testing on the most vulnerable folks, people that are out of sight, out of mind, as Lydia says. And in part because it felt, it's a term that tech companies use when they're trying something new, when they're testing a new feature on whatever it is that they're starting to roll out. And so it felt like a bit of a cheeky way to co-opt something that belonged to them, but we wanted to use for us. Um, And yeah, when Lydia says that, she's talking about this context where we're not necessarily privy to what's happening in this sandbox. We're not supposed to be. And we, as a collective, when we think about the average citizen, don't necessarily see it until it starts outgrowing this small space, testing space. And I think, we're starting to see that now. We, you don't have to look too far to see how quickly it's sort of like mushroomed and proliferated. But yeah, it felt cheeky and fun to steal a word that they were using, but also pretty poignant.
Mm, absolutely. Absolutely. And I know you spoke about audience reactions a little bit about what you hope. I would love to get more into that because what sort of response do you hope from us to see that? Because I'll be honest, like watching it, you feel almost helpless.
Mm,
As a viewer, it's heart-wrenching and I'm left with the question of what now?
mm.
What do you hope audiences take away from the sandbox?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think so. There's two things. First, like the film, everyone is going to have a different tech takeaway depending on where they are. So there will be a Canadian audience, there will be an American audience, there will be a European audience, there will be, an African audience, there'll be a Kenyan audience, and all of those different groups, they're going to latch on to something that's slightly different depending on what's happening in their real world in real time. And so I hope that audiences are able to tease what that is for them. We're looking forward to later on down the road when we're sharing the film more broadly to 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 having deeper conversations about what that means in very specific areas. We just screened at CPH. One of the things they did was they invited Danish experts after the screening to come and talk about what was happening very locally in Denmark right before their election with respect to their own migration policy and the tech that's being used. And that's, as a filmmaker, like that's what you want. You want someone to take the thing and to run with it and to use it in their own way as their own tool in their own tool belts for yeah, to champion the things that they're working on the ground. Especially, a film of this scope, I think, can't do all the things at once. Um, and then, with respect to tone, it also felt really important to me, having spent that time on the ship. And, we were talking, Jordan Kawai, our editor, and I, amazing editor, about, what was the feeling that we wanted to be left with, and what was the feeling of being on the ship. And, the way that sequence plays out is pretty true to what it felt like, just obviously in a very truncated form, in the sense that there was a moment of deep exhale and deep joy and deep relief and dancing, and all that music you hear is diegetic, which means that it actually was playing in real time, and people were having a good time. And then shortly after that, the mood shifted, because as we know, it's not the end of the story. There's going to be, there's still going to be much, a continued journey of hardship. And it felt important not to necessarily allow, maybe allow is not the right word, but it felt important um not to rely on a traditional modality of, but it's going to be okay if you just do this, because it's
Mm,
not going to be okay if you just do that. There are lots of things that have to happen. And so this general sense of unease that is woven throughout the film, I think, is an important sentiment to be left with, because it can also be instructive. We're not necessarily saying, okay, you need to do X, Y, and Z, but certainly in specific places there is an X, Y, and Z,
mm.
um, and I hope that audiences are eager to start to think about what that might be.
I love that and I appreciate that because this is the sort of film that makes you want to be involved in some way, but like you said, it's an overwhelming question. There are places and spaces and times where you can answer that, and
Yeah.
and I think that this is a sort of film that really wants makes you want to do something.
And I'll say in the Canadian context too, we're really excited about rolling out our theatrical in the fall and working with community. Like we're starting the process of engaging folks who are working on things like Bill C-12 and C-2 that we've just seen come through, the Canadian system and what that means for mass cancellations of asylum applications, which are undoubtedly being facilitated by AI. So these types of conversations are happening on a very granular level in Canada. And we're looking forward to putting the film in the hands of folks who would be best equipped to start to dig into that. And um, yeah.
I appreciate that. Honestly, Sandbox is just wonderful, truly remarkable. And I really appreciate the chance to chat with you about it. Thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Thank you for your interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Kenya-Jade Pinto, director of The Sandbox, which is premiering at Hot Docs 2026. Thanks so much. Oh, have a great day.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thanks.